Hello. So, I'm going to tell you guys a story today. It's a real story. It's my story. Um, I hope that you get something out of it. And if nothing else, you're going to get to see some pretty funny pictures of me growing up. So, my name's Stacey Seronick. These days I work as a content strategist at Wells Fargo in the wholesale banking division. We're not going to talk about Wells Fargo today. And as I said, I am older than I look. I've actually been doing this for almost 20 years. And even though these are some of the titles I've held, I've had a lot of other jobs that really you would never expect had anything to do with user experience. Assistant property manager, record label and booking agency manager, clothing designer. In my opinion, all of this has to do with user experience, as do all of these titles that I've held. If you also notice, I've never held the same title twice. So despite that fact, I have continued to advocate for being a generalist, being a user experience generalist, and no matter what your job or title or role actually may be, this is a real prime focus, is the experience. So we're going to take you back a bit. Please understand these pictures don't actually correspond to the ages there. I wasn't that little at 16. So at 16, I had just about graduated from high school, or I should say I left a year early, and I decided to go to college. And let me just point out for any of you who are considering going back to university for anything, liberal arts degrees, very useful still. It's what I have, actually. Bennington College, though, which is where I went, doesn't have majors, doesn't have grades, doesn't have required courses, so I made up my own. I called it Intuitive Interactivity, and it was comprised of art, sculpture, bookmaking, writing, philosophy, all kinds of interesting stuff. Electronic music, and really importantly, active listening. Yes, I actually took a class in that. It required me to take ownership of my own studies and accountability to myself to learn, and it really laid a foundation for me for project and time management, to be perfectly honest, which I call self-management. So I graduated in 1998, and I thought to myself, okay, I've got a degree in intuitive interactivity, and nobody knows what I'm talking about when I say that. Where am I going to get a job? I'm in rural Vermont, which if none of you are familiar with Vermont in the States, it's cow country. It's all farms. So I figured out I can do computer stuff. Cool. What's going on with computers in rural Vermont? Basically, the newspaper industry was about the only industry at that time who was even utilizing computers in that part of the country. So I got a job working at a local newspaper. It was a weekly paper, and I was hired to be a production artist. And that was a very specific role, and it entailed taking the business requirements, the customer requirements, and create a print ad and make it camera ready for pre-press printing. So I'm going to pause for a second and explain sort of my theory on jobs. This is what I call a comb job, as in contrast to net jobs. So when I talk about comb jobs, what I'm talking about is there's one skill, that's the handle of the comb, that this employer has hired you to do, and then there's maybe 2, 3, or 4 even more granular skills that they're expecting you to do within that job. But beyond that little circle, that's all you are supposed to be doing. That's not me. I am a net. And by net, I mean I've got a whole variety of skills and interests that I've managed to interconnect over the years. Things like comic books and interactive art and performance art. So I didn't really like this role because it was a comb job and because there was such a narrow set of expectations on me. So I set about to make it a net job. So I told my bosses, look, I can do this web thing. What do you want me to do about it? Where can we take this? because the newspaper was owned by a gigantic corporate conglomerate that owns most of these types of weekly shopper newspapers in the United States. And they had their own webmasters and web properties, and were doing whatever was hip and cool at that time in 1999 online, which was pretty crappy looking. So I figured out that most of our readers were actually reading our paper strictly for the real estate listings. And so I said, let's put up a website that shows all of our real estate listings in a more interactive format. And the publisher said, great, go for it, do it. Cool. I just expanded my responsibilities to something that I was never hired to do, what hadn't been expected of me, but I let the people know I can do this. I can do it this way. I can fill a need for our readers, for our customers. Give me some money, let's do it. Cool. So I stayed there for a while, too long perhaps, and moved my way up to the ranks. By the time I left, I was the production manager, and decided Vermont is not for me. There's got to be something else out there. So I moved back to Boston, which is where I'm originally from, and got a temp job at a bank. Very quickly realized I don't want to be an admin assistant ever again. And eventually picked up a job as a package design consultant. So this is something I'd never done before. Packaging design, what's that all about? Apparently it's about boxes and clamshells and being able to do industrial spec drawings for manufacturers who are going to make your packaging and your boxes, who probably don't speak the language you speak because they're in China. So you can't really use language in your specs. They have to be perfect as is and self-explanatory. So that was a skill I picked up. This could have been a net job, but my manager had a real problem with delegation, so it became a comb job. All I ever did was design boxes and clamshells. And while this was cool to me in that I was picking up a new skill that I had previously not held, and I could see where I could go on and be a packaging designer, I guess, it was not satisfying, because that's all I was able to do. And try as hard as I could to say, but I can do this, and I could help you with this. And what about that long list of backlog that you have on the wall? No, we don't need help with that. I'll take care of that. All right? So at this point, I decided to try something else. Let's try and follow in the family footsteps and get into advertising. If any of you have ever worked in advertising, you know that it's an interesting world. So at this point, I get hired to work for a local ad agency in Boston, which was actually part of Havas, which is one of the world's largest conglomerates of advertising agencies. And I was hired as a production artist in the interactive department. Probably the most comb job I've ever had in my life. I was literally handed, for say Monster.com, a series of JPEGs, turn this into an animated GIF banner, and then compress it to 3K. What? 3K? Did I hear you right? 3K? Okay. But that's what I did. That's all I did. And while there were some very impressive sounding clients that I worked on, like Monster.com and FootJoy golf shoes, it's a number of others, Volkswagen, it was maybe the most boring work I've ever done in my life, because there was no means for me to expand this role. Anything that I offered, hey, I can do this, we've got somebody doing that. Hey, I can do this, we've got 4 people doing that. I said, all right, I don't think this is for me. So at this point, I decide I'm gonna try in a whole other city. So I moved to Brooklyn, New York, with no job and no place to live. I said, I can do this. So I stay on my friend's couch for a bit, and I take the first job I can get, which is in property management in Manhattan. And I was an assistant property manager of some luxury buildings in Manhattan. And this is probably the one job I've had that most people kind of really scratch their heads when I say, trust me, there was a lot of user experience here. At that point, I'm working with the tenants of the buildings, who are effectively my customers or end users, and ensuring that they're happy and that they're having a positive experience in their apartment homes. I'm also working with the building management, so the superintendent and the staff that's maintaining the building. they're also my customers. And they have a very different relationship with the tenants of the building than I do, because I'm the one collecting the rent, basically. What I did at that job was I learned a lot of really interesting things. I learned about people. I spent a lot of time on site at the building, sitting in the lobby, watching my staff, watching the building maintenance staff and the superintendent, and watching the people who lived in the building come and go. And yes, I admit to some making up of stories in my head of, ooh, that woman's got a Barney's bag. Wonder what she just bought. But a lot of it was trying to get an understanding of when were people coming through the lobby, what were they asking for, what needs were not being met by my staff, and what could I do to fill in those gaps. So by my definition, absolutely user experience there. However, it was property management in Manhattan. Not at all what I had gone to school for, not what I saw myself making a career in, though I could have. So I quit. Let's be honest, my job was eliminated. I say I quit, but the company bought another company, and my role was, I was basically told I had to reapply for my job. And at 25, 24, I was not willing to do that. I said, screw you, not reapplying for my job. I'll go find something else. So at this point, I kind of fell into a rut. The economy was not going very well. This was probably about 2003-ish, and it was really rough. I personally had a really rough time finding a job. So I decided, let's give grad school a try. Why not? So I get into a grad program back at Bennington College, where I'd gone and gotten my undergraduate degree, and it was an MFA in poetry. That is a not useful degree, let me tell you. If you want to teach poetry, that's the terminal degree. Great, good on you. But I didn't want to teach poetry, and I'm not really sure why I went into that program, other than to say I have a master's degree. So I lasted a semester doing that, but the outcome of that was a lot of writing and a lot of self-reflection. And that was the most valuable part of that one semester that I got out of it, was looking deeply inwards at what do I want to do? What are my strengths? And where do I want to go next? Because I knew I wasn't going to stay in grad school studying poetry. So I leave there, and I go back to the job hunting in the job market. And oops, using the wrong button there. 26, am I on track here? Yeah, I guess so. So at this point, I was determined to get back into the design world in any way, shape, or form, because I had been out of it for a while now. And while in my mind I had always been focused on user experience, though I certainly wasn't calling it even back then, and focusing on myself and understanding myself as a user, as well as the users I might be designing for. I finally picked up a job with a little company in Brooklyn. It was a wholesale company. And their whole thing was jewelry box display and design. And not those beautiful jewelry boxes that you buy and put on your dresser, but the cheap little plastic and paper ones that you take your jewelry home in from the store. And I was really excited about this job. I thought I was going to be given an opportunity. I was told when I was hired that the opportunity was, you're going to art direct all of our custom packaging. You're going to art direct anything that our customers want that's custom, it's all you. You're also going to do our print collateral, and you're going to manage our website. I thought, great, this sounds like a net job. This sounds like something I can really get into. And it kind of was, to a certain extent. Unfortunately, my bosses were a couple of serious misogynists, and I'm a woman, so that didn't go over very well. I was unable to gain the trust that I needed from these two men in order to be really effective at my job. And I shouldn't say that, because I did eventually gain some of their trust. And that was demonstrated by the fact that they were like, huh, you can do all these other things. Okay, let's give them to you. Well, what they gave me was sales. I don't know about the rest of you, but I hate sales. Like, really, really hate sales. But this was what I was being told. You want more? You want to do something different? Here you go. You want to earn our respect and earn, some points with us? This is what you got to do. So I started going to trade shows and running the booth. I started doing online sales and making those calls back to customers that were who had placed online orders and were having problems, and it was miserable. However, I was also given a staff of 2 to manage, and this was the first time I was managing people. Now, I had not been to business school. I had never had any formal training in managing people. It was just sort of thrown into my lap. And luckily, for my next role, so I'll get to next, this was some really valuable experience to me. And luckily, it was just 2 people. So I had a user group of 2 that I could test out my managerial skills with. But I really was able to hone my interpersonal relationship skills. And this is where I really learned that there is something that you can get from everybody that's positive. I don't care if that person comes across as the biggest jerk in the world and always has a scowl on their face. There is a positive part of them that you can find, and if you can bring that out and show it back to them, oh my God, the work you can get out of somebody is unbelievable. So that was by far the most valuable part of what I learned about that job. And when I left there, and I left there in a huff, and we don't need to have that talk, although if anybody really wants to hear the story. What is it, 3 pints? Is that the rule we came up with yesterday? I'm just kidding, I don't drink, I'm just kidding. So I took the first job I could get, because I needed to get out of there. Between the misogyny and there were some sort of nefarious business practices going on, it wasn't for me. So, as I said, I took the first job I could get, and I think I've started falling behind on my slides there. There we go. Actually, I got way behind on my slides. Sorry about that. Luckily, they don't have much to do with what I'm talking about. They're just supposed to be funny. So the job I picked up next was at the Internet Archive. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Internet Archive, archive.org, the Wayback Machine. But there are people who scan all those books that are online. That is not a machine like for Google Books. And that's what I did. I was a book scanner. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, are you serious? How can you claim to have been doing UX for almost 20 years when you were a book scanner? Trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. I lasted for about 3 weeks scanning books before I said, you know what, this really hurts. Because it's physically laborious. You're doing this 8 hours a day. And laborious work, not physically laborious work, not my thing. So I said to my manager, is there something else I can do here? Because I have all these skills that have nothing to do with this job. Surely you need a designer or something like that, a researcher. She said, oh yeah, we have all those people. They're in San Francisco. If you're interested, you can move to San Francisco. I was not interested in leaving Brooklyn at the time. So I said, all right, stick to your little box. So I did my book scanning for another 2 months before I was dragged somewhat kicking and screaming into management and was given the role of being the night shift supervisor. Now at this point, my customers, I have customers that I'm scanning for, and those are the end users. Those are all of yous who would be reading our books online. But I'm also now managing 9 people. And as I mentioned before, I'd only ever managed 2 people, and that was the first time I'd ever managed people before. So luckily the archive, the Internet Archive, gave me a little bit of help and training in the form of official training management classes, which are hilarious. If you ever take one of those kind of classes, they are a riot. And so most of what I learned, I taught myself, and I sort of learned by trial and error. And I thought of the entire time as an experiment. So I'm going to learn from all of you that I'm managing about people, about what drives you, what motivates you. Why are you doing this pretty annoying, painful, repetitive job? What is bringing you to do this? And I started talking to my staff a lot about this. And that's when I really started understanding that people come from all different walks of life, and when you ask them a question about why do you do this, what they tell you is most likely not the real reason. And this is when I started learning more to pay attention to body language, facial expressions, what isn't being said, who isn't in the room when I'm talking to them, and those subtle things. And I did this, that was all my job entailed. So I learned about labor laws, and I learned about HR and payroll and all that really fun, exciting stuff. And I finally said, I can't keep doing this. You need to give me more. Not only am I bored, but I have all these skills you're not utilizing. Surely there's something you can have me do. And for my sins, I was repaid in kind. So I was told by the head of the books department, great, I've got a challenge for you. Fix quality. I'm sorry, did you say fix quality? Yeah, we have no standards of quality. We have no standards of judging quality. We have no standards of training how to judge quality. It's like, ooh, okay. When do you want to hear about that? He said, take your time. It was a nonprofit, so there was no budget, literally no budget, but all the time in the world. So 3 years later, I delivered my recommendations. And what I did was I taught myself how to run a service design engagement. So when you're talking about quality, that's a big topic. And when you're talking about quality of a physical product that is being represented in a digital environment, things start getting a little strange. And then you've got you start adding in the people who are actually doing the scanning, and they need to adhere to certain quality guidelines that nobody's really ever told them what those are. And then you've got the QA analysts who are evaluating the quality. Nobody's ever told them what's too dark, what's too light, what's too much of a cropped letter, what's acceptable. And because of all this, we had no reasonable way to track how much we were spending on quality, and was this even a thing? Were we even producing quality digital scans? So I became a quality analyst. For a year, I took that job, and I learned more than I ever wanted to know about that job. But that was how I learned what service design meant. And that was how I learned how you talk to, yes, your end users, the people who are going to read those scans. But in this case, it was a lot more, that was sort of secondary to the experience of the team members. And that was why I took on the role of being a quality analyst. So I talked to my fellow QA techs. I set up little online chat rooms so that we could chat with each other and teach each other. And I came to realize that the fact that there were no standards that had been established, or that those standards were so fuzzy and vague, was the biggest problem. The second biggest problem that was existing here was that they were using 3 different systems, usually with 2 different monitors. They had a stack of scrap paper next to them and a pencil so that they could jot down the problems on the pages, and then they had to re-input all that data back into a 3rd system, and if management wanted to see any of this data, they had to pull it. None of it was push data. It's like, oh, this is all some big problems here. So as I said, 3 years later, I gave them my recommendations. What they did with those recommendations, to be honest, I don't know, because I left shortly thereafter. Because that was an amazing experience and looked awesome on my resume. So after that, I went back to freelancing for a while. I started my own clothing company for a bit, taught myself about supply chain logistics and working with Chinese and Indian manufacturers and drawing spec drawings. Started doing that again, but for fashion, not something I'd ever done before. And managed to put together my own clothing line. I put out a 40-piece couture collection. I brought it to market within 90 days. And I said, that was awesome. Let's put that on my resume and move on. To be honest, I think I sold 2 pieces of clothing. They were all made to order. It was all latex clothing, so it had to be custom made. But those 2 pieces paid for my entire investment. So at this point, I decided, you know what? I really like having that regular paycheck every week or every other week. I don't like this feeling of not knowing how much I'm getting and when. So I went back to working in an office for somebody. And I went into EdTech. I was back in Boston at this point after having been moved all over the country for the archive, and started working at a company where I was hired for an extraordinarily specific role. And that was to develop content for online courses that were going to teach college and high school students, as well as adult learners coming back to college, about Microsoft Office. And when I was hired, the way this was explained to me, I was like, oh, okay, it's a comb job, but I need a job and this will do. Whoa, was I wrong. This was a really serious net job and they didn't even know it. That was the worst part. So what I was expected to do was to come up with learning paths, learning objectives, create the projects. So what it was project-based learning. So you're going to build a resume, and in the course of building that resume, you will have learned these 17 skills in Microsoft Word. And you'll learn how to build a nice resume. So it was that kind of thing. But not only did I need to build these projects, I had to learn how to code them, because they were being auto-graded by a grading engine. Okay, I haven't done any coding since I was about 11, and that was Logo. If any of you are familiar with what Logo is, then that is how old I am. So I had to learn SQL, and not even SQL. It was a specific flavor of SQL that had been written by this company for this project. Talk about non-transferable skills. Well, I did it. I learned the language, I started coding, and I realized that I could just put on my resume, I know SQL now. I don't have to tell them it's a specific flavor. That looked pretty cool. But the problem with that company was that they did not realize the breadth of skills that were required by this position. Not even the manager of the department understood this. It was, make those projects, go make it work. I don't know how you do what you do though. So when I started saying, I'm doing a lot of work here, and I kind of need some more money for this. They're like, oh, okay, this is corporate America. Well, your next review, well, I'll be sure to put in for that big 4% raise for you. Awesome. Well, this got dangled in front of me for months before I said, you know what? I don't think this is ever gonna happen. Goodbye. And I moved on. And I decided that I had had plenty of snow. That winter in Boston, we had 9 feet of snow. And that was the impetus for me to say, what's warm? Where is there no snow? And I very seriously looked at Auckland, but I don't know if y'all are aware of this, it's kind of hard to move here without a job, unless you're like a plumber or a carpenter. And I am neither of those things. So I said, what's the second best place to Auckland? San Francisco. Let's go there. So I started interviewing, looking for any job I could find in San Francisco that was vaguely related to one of the 17 different skills I had, and luckily was hired by Wells Fargo as a contractor, sight unseen, which was really funny when I showed up the first day with hair like this at Wells Fargo. They're like, oh, we hired you? Yes, you did. I'm here to start. So I was when I was hired, because it was through an agency and it was It was a contract. I was told it would be a content strategy role. I show up on my first day, and I'm introduced as the new editorial writer. Ooh, okay, guess I'm doing some writing here. All right, cool, I can do that. I've been doing lots of writing. So unfortunately, at Wells Fargo, editorial writers make like 2/3 of what content strategists make. So I was like, ooh, how do I get into that role? How do I get that title? So I had to prove that I could do strategy. I knew I could do it. I had done this before, although not under that title or with those words attached to it. And I just did it. I got myself onto a project, unbeknownst to my boss, that I volunteered to work on outside of the other 6 projects that I was on, and was able to show that I can synthesize user research and come up with voice and tone just like those guys. And for my efforts, I was rewarded. 8 months into a 15-month contract, I was hired full-time as a content strategist. Woohoo, I said. All right, now I'm going to show you what I can really do. And that's when I started just showing up to meetings that I wasn't invited to and offering my opinions that weren't asked for. And at first, I got a little bit of like, who's she? And then when people heard what I had to say, and I did it respectfully, they said, maybe there's something to this. And I started getting invited to those meetings, and that I had to tell my boss I was getting invited to. And at some point, I started whispering to anybody who would listen about service design. I said, you know, this is like a thing that's happening out there. What's all this about, they're saying? We're in banking. They're like 10 years behind everybody else. And we're in America, so a couple years behind the really progressive groups in Europe and Australia who have been doing service design for years. And when I told them what this was all about and explained to them, so what is service design, how might we integrate it into the bank, I was told, go for it, find a client. So I did. So we're working on spinning up a service design practice in the wholesale division. Hopefully we're going to announce this in the coming weeks. And that's how I did that. Now there's somebody doing service design, running a service design practice, not under that name in the retail side of our bank, and she makes a lot of money. I'm like, ooh, because I can't pay my electricity bill this week. I'd like your job. So that's what I'm working on right now. Yes, I'm a content strategist in title, but I'm also a service designer, and I'm building that practice. And from all the things I learned from all these past jobs have allowed me to know how to work with these people, how to be respectful of other people's knowledge, how to be empathetic to my own teammates and understand where they're coming from so that I can work with them and show them where I'm coming from so that we can all work for the customer. I guess what I really want to leave you with here is the fact that I've done a lot of different jobs, and I've made out of them what I needed to make myself happy. And when I couldn't, I left. Simple as that. And hopefully soon I will figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And when I do, I will let you all know.